Hello, Chidima.
Matt, yes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone is here. Before we start with maths, we would like to do like a mini quiz to see how far we've learned. So I would like to ask my colleague Kariman to please put up the polls. So you just see questions on the screen. It really doesn't matter if you get it or not. We just want to know if you've been following the presentations, and as well as these questions will show up during the final assessments. So if we can put, Carmen, are you there? Day 2 quiz, please. Carmen. Yeah, don't know where she is. Okay, I don't know why she's not responding.
Hi, Chi. The poll has been launched.
Oh, it has? Okay.
It has.
All right, thank you. Karen, please, if once we get at least maybe like over 10 people do the quiz, just let me know. Probably give 2-3 minutes for them to do the quiz, and then we can round up.
Okay, sure.
You can share the results with us. So I don't know if you can read out the questions, because I don't see anything on my screen. If you do see it, if you can read out the questions and just so people follow.
Sure. So our first question is, metal scraps are on the seafloor and marine ponds only when impairing fishery activities. Is it true or false? Question number 1. And question 2, which of the following stakeholder group is not usually relevant on the onshore decommissioning process? Have to select one option only.
So we discussed the stakeholders yesterday. So I think in Ping's presentation, she highlighted some stakeholders. So which of the stakeholders are relevant? Yeah, so number 3.
Which industry tools and procedures are not applicable in the decommissioning process? You have to also select one option: comparative assessment, personal development plans, best available techniques, or multiple criteria decision analysis.
Yeah, so this question we have touched on today.
I'm sorry, the voice is not clear, and she's so I couldn't interpret.
It's not one of the tools that were highlighted today. The next question, please.
Okay, it's true or false. Decommissioning is only relevant in countries or regions where oil and gas reserves have been exhausted. It's true or false?
So where is decommissioning only relevant to countries that have oil and gas, who are oil and gas producing countries? Is this answer true or false? Next question, please.
Okay, final question. It's also true or false. Often abandoned wells only exist in countries or regions where oil and gas reserves have been exhausted. True or false?
So we talked about orphaned wells. I think Ping yesterday discussed the orphaned wells. Do they only exist in countries where they're producing? How many people do we have in the?
Well, for now it's only 6, so just give it maybe minutes.
Another minute. Okay. So you see a poll with questions on your screen. If you please can take the questions, so we can just have a rough idea of how much you've learned in the past day? Give like 30 seconds and then probably close the polls. And so Matt can go ahead. How many people do we have now?
Only 8 for now.
Okay, I think people are either still haven't seen you
Maybe
here.
they're not back yet.
Yes. Okay, but we probably can close the poll. We'll do another
Okay.
later on. Can you share the results?
Okay, sure, just a second. So can you see it?
For some weird reason, I can't see
Yes.
anything green. Well, I'm sure. Dev, can you confirm if you can see the results, or Matt, if you
I
can
can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see the results.
Okay, for some weird reason, I don't know why I can't see anything. So what's the results?
The correct answer is false,
Yes.
Yes, false. So
which means the
I
metal
think-
scraps on the seafloor are pollutants.
Right.
Not only when they are impairing fishing activities, they can be pollutants because they are contaminating the seabed.
Mm-hmm.
They can be interfering with other marine activities.
Yes. Then the other questions.
Okay, the correct answer was fisheries sector. 90% got that right.
Yeah, so that's
For which one?
everyone got it right?
No, 90%.
Oh, 90%. Okay, so more than yeah,
Hmm.
it's more than half of people who took it.
It can be
Okay.
debatable though, because if you're near a lake or near a river where people fish, you could want to consider fisheries.
Yeah, but I think the question is specifically if it's offshore, no? Or
No,
like
no.
marine
On-
environment.
Onshore.
Onshore.
Oh, onshore,
that's
yeah.
not-
Okay, yeah.
But
that's why
Onshore, yeah, right.
I think it's a good generic question, but of course, it's very location specific. So you could be near a lake, and then there could be, yeah. So just to point that out, I think
Yeah,
everyone
okay.
understand that.
Mm-hmm. Then the other questions.
So for the industry tools and procedures which are not applicable in the commissioning process, 90% also get that right, which is personal development plans.
Yeah, so the DPD, I think
Yes, exactly.
it wasn't mentioned during the presentation. So you see,
Okay.
like people were listening.
Good job.
Yeah.
So for the first question, the commission is only relevant in countries or regions where oil and gas reserves have been exhausted. 80% get that right, which is the answer is false.
So the commission it's not only relevant when the country is producing, right?
No, the focus is on whether the oil and gas reserves have been exhausted.
If they have been exhausted.
If they've been exhausted, yeah. So there can be some wells which have been abandoned.
Yeah, or like orphaned wells as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also to stress what I mentioned yesterday, decommissioning, you should already think about it very, very early on. When you put out your first well,
Right.
when you buy an asset,
Mm-hmm.
as long as there's oil and gas activity, you need to understand how you're going to decommission and make sure there are sufficient funds to decommission.
Thank you for that.
Okay, for the final questions, orphan or abandoned wells only exist in countries or regions where oil and gas has been exhausted. Also. Okay, 50% get that right. The correct question was false.
Matt, do you want to? I don't
Yeah, so there can be orphaned or abandoned wells in areas where the there are still oil and gas reserves, but maybe that well didn't strike the reservoir and it was abandoned, or it had a shorter life. Meanwhile, the gas reserves are still in place.
Right. Thank you very much.
It's a very specific location
Yes. So just before we call on Matt to discuss assessments and site cleanup and reporting, just a little exercise so that Matt knows that people are actually listening and he's not speaking to the screen alone. If it's possible, you can put on your video so we just see that at least we have people behind the laptops. You just put on your video, or if your internet doesn't let you. So Matt, this is for you, so you know that you're speaking to people. So if your internet doesn't let you, just raise your hand or like clap or something, so we know that at least people are actually there and he's not speaking to the screen.
It's maybe nice to take one quick group photo.
Yes, so that's why I said everyone should put on their video, but some people, maybe their internet might not let them. So yes, I see. Hi, Kanati. I see you from Mozambique. Welcome. Hello,
Yes.
Ernesto.
Thank you. Sorry for the mask.
No problem. Hi. I see a few people on the screen. Please, if you're not able to do this, you can just put like a thumbs up or something so that we can at least know that we're here. We're all here. Right. So, anyways, hi, Edith. Welcome. Hi, Claudio. I see you. Hi, Hussam. Nice. Hi.
Hi, Shadima.
Hi. Hi, Evelina. Oh, I see the Team Mozambique. They're together as always. So it's good. So Matt, you see, you're not speaking to your screen. You'll be speaking to everyone. So now I think I can let you present now. So Matt will be doing a presentation on assessments. He'll be discussing the procedures that go on during site cleanup and how reporting is done. And he'll also be discussing like ESIAs, so environmental and social impact assessments, a bit in detail, and how site rehabilitation is important and remediation as well, and how to do the closeout or closure reporting. So Matt, I don't know if you're ready to share your screen. Matt, do we lose you? You're muted, Matt. I can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Start again.
Yes. So please go ahead.
Okay.
We're not seeing your screen though.
Are we good?
I still don't see your screen. You're using two screens, so I think you need to drag the other one, your presentation, into this one, I think.
Disconnect the other screen.
Oh, I can share it for you.
Can you see?
Not yet. Now you're a bit frozen.
Am I on yet?
No. If you want, I can share your presentation if that's okay for you, because we still don't see your screen.
Okay, start again. Module 6.
Yes.
You
So
can see
the
it.
last module for today. No, we don't see it. Still not. Let me share the screen for you.
Are you sharing? Are you allowing me to share?
Yeah, you can share, of course. Everyone can share their screen. I don't know why you're not able to share. I think you could do that yesterday. I don't know what happened today.
Hang on, let me click share my screen. Ah. Okay, maybe this is where I went wrong.
Right, now we see it. Super. You can put it on presenters mode. Yeah.
Okay, are we on?
Yes, I can see you clearly.
Are we good?
Yes.
Great. Thank you again, everybody. Assessment, site cleanup, and reporting. So we are getting towards the kind of end of the process in a way. And we've heard about fantastic examples from California and Thailand and the process in Italy. And we've heard fantastic explanations about the various tools. So I'm going to try and summarize a little bit with the environmental and social impact assessments that most of you are already familiar with from projects, and the ESIA scoping reports, stakeholder consultation, environmental appraisals, decommissioning plans or programs, site rehabilitation, remediation, marking remains, safety zones, and the closeout and closure report. So a lot of this is kind of the administrative steps. The ESIA, it really should be done before a project is started, of course, and it also should indicate that a decommissioning plan will be submitted by the regulator. Now, the decommissioning plan is really the nuts and bolts on which of the process you're going to do first. It's the kind of more logistical operational plan, the decommissioning plan. The ESIA considers all the impacts. And the ESA, it might state that the costs are going to be covered by the developer. We've talked about that, depends on the countries. And it may require that a fund is established in an escrow account or to pay for the decommissioning. We've also covered that. But at the beginning of a project, the ESIA will not know what the cost will be at the decommissioning in 30 years' time, which is why the ESA needs to be done specifically for the decommissioning phase. Okay, the decommissioning, a lot of ESIAs, as you know, include an EIA for a drilling operation, for example, will include a section on decommissioning, which is realistic because the drilling program is quite short. But an EIA for an LNG project will have a section on decommissioning, but the fine details of that will not be known until 30 years. So the decommissioning process has to have its own ESIA. That is the point. This is a standard ESIA kind of flow diagram. Most countries have a similar structure with screening and the assessment of the impacts, the consultation of the stakeholders, and the assessment of alternatives. And the alternatives can be evaluated using certain tools. We've heard about the tools already, such as the BAT. I don't want to go into too many tools because we've talked about them, and Paul gave us a very detailed analysis of the different pros and cons of the tools and how they are used. But it's very important that the regulators be aware of these tools, the BAT, the comparative assessment, and the other ones, to help select the best decommissioning option. Alternatives to decommissioning, as Paul has already mentioned, is or to repurpose the decommissioning. They potentially can be used for wind platforms. They can potentially be used for installation of water power projects using tides and currents. Rigs to reef is a common one and very successful in many parts of the world, California, but also in Brunei and Thailand and other places. And they can be used as aquaculture, but these are mostly unlikely. Apart from the rigs to reef, the other ones, the repurposing, is tricky because there's lots of issues to do with safety, and a drilling platform in the middle of the ocean might not be in the best place for the wind. It might not be the best place for some of these other energy structures. We've talked about these impacts already. The discharges, the gaseous emissions, the underwater noise, physical disturbance. This is the same slide as I had earlier today, just as a reminder that these are the impacts that we must all understand as regulators, that they cannot be missed like a checklist. So the nuts and bolts of the decommissioning, the actual decommissioning plan. So it's important that the plan be considered early in the process. that it has to be detailed. The details should include the specific methods and how the plan is going to be executed. As Paul mentioned, it's also very important that the decommissioning plans includes all the components that are going to be commissioned. And the decommissioning plan, it might have some components which are going to be decommissioned this year and dismantled. It might have other components will be decommissioned in 2 years' time. And in some situations and in some structures, decommissioning plans are broken down into multiple plans for different parts of the structures. The decommissioning plan has to justify, as we talked about just now, what are the alternatives and the pros and cons, as we heard from Norway. The regulator needs to understand from the operators, why have they selected this alternative? And it should be supported by a standalone decommissioning EIA. And then finally, it's critical to involve all the stakeholders. Of course, the regulators, they need to be involved, but also the local communities, NGOs, during the plan development. So for offshore structures, typically the shipping industry, ports and harbors, the fisheries, and perhaps the fisheries, recreational fisheries, industrial fisheries, recreational activities such as scuba diving sites or kite surfing or any of these kind of situations, it might be applicable. Make sure that all the stakeholders are consulted, and to gain the trust with all the stakeholders, the process needs to be transparent. In the UK, decommissioning programs will typically develop up to 3 years before decommissioning begins. So the plans are in place, all the process has been arranged 3 years before the start. Some installations soon to be commissioned will be subject to ESIA, others will not. It all depends on the legislation of a country, and it depends on the specific situations. More examples from the UK are that they require a decommissioning program or a plan that has to be approved, and that the decommissioning plan should be supported by an ESIA. So some of the consultees, for example, in the UK, would be the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, the Northern Ireland Fishermen's Federation, Global Marine Systems Limited, which is a company with experts in subsea cables. If you're going to move some offshore structures, you don't want to damage any other communication cables, fiber optic cables, and other things which might be in the general area. And the following entities for most offshore and onshore projects include marine and coastal protected areas, so MPAs, nature reserves, local authorities related to waste disposal and disturbance, and the use of roads and water supplies. There's going to be a lot of washing needed, and there's going to be a lot of waste generated, as we've talked about, and of course representatives of local communities, as well as marine mammal, academia, whale watching groups. Just a few examples of what might be relevant in an offshore situation around the UK. Every country has its specific stakeholder groups. Now I'm going to show a few examples of documents which are out there to give you a flavor of the kind of scale and what's available out there on the internet in the public domain. So this is the Murchison Decommissioning EIA Scoping Report 2012, which demonstrates the area off in the north of Scotland, where there are several rigs and several pipeline arrays. Another 3 here from the Environmental Impact Assessment, another Ramboll example. Maybe Paul's familiar with this one. Another one, Centrica Energy, Murchison Decommissioning of Scotland, 2012, 2015, 2016. So these are documents which are being prepared by professionals and which have been approved by the regulators, and that provide a lot of detail on the process. And because you, as participants, are going to be asked to develop a decommissioning plan, I've included here some of the contents typically which go into, this is a decommissioning EIA, but to give you an example of the project description, which I've highlighted in blue. So these platforms, Brent Alpha, Brent Bravo, Brent Charlie, Brent Delta, these are different platforms. And then there's Brent South pipelines and materials inventory. So this is the details of the structures which are going to be removed, decommissioned. They will include the specifications of the steel and the quantities and the sizes. And then section 7 will include the potential significant impacts which have been identified. Moving on, another EIA. Again, the description of the items. It's interesting that different EIA documents sometimes have different contents, table of contents. So this one has more information on the program management and the costs and the actual operation. It also has the environmental impact assessment elements. Now, these are decommissioning programs which are also out there. So there's BP, Shell, and CNR International. So there's 3 different documents which are in the public domain, which provide all the details for the decommissioning program. So this is how are you actually going to decommission? This is going to inform the regulator. The whole process of consultation has been done. The whole process of impact assessment is completed. And now you have the decommissioning program itself. And here you have executive summary, background information, description of the items. So section 4 describes in detail the items that are going to be removed and the inventory of the materials that are involved, and how the removal and the disposal options have been addressed and using the tools that we know about, and the selected removal and disposal option, and then how each one is going to, the wells and the drill cuttings, and how these are actually going to take place, all the way as far as any supporting studies and the post-decommissioning monitoring and maintenance, clearing and debris. So this is the document that will be used by all the different contractors who are involved in the actual process of the decommissioning, the physical process of removal or abandonment or breakdown and restructuring or whatever they've decided. So the key stages in the EIA for the decommissioning is really, as you know, there's a scoping report, alternatives, all the rest of it. But in some countries, there's another document which is called the environmental appraisal, okay, or the EA, which outlines all the process. It's more like a kind of a practical summary, and it's something which can communicate the environmental considerations and management plans to the public and to the stakeholders. So it's like a presentation document, okay, the environmental appraisal. And here's an example of one, the Kingfisher Field Decommissioning Final Environmental Appraisal. Okay, this is submitted. So this is prepared by Shell, and it has to be prepared to satisfy the regulatory requirement and to inform the planning and execution. It's submitted to the UK Department of Energy, and it should be read in conjunction with decommissioning programs. So in the end, in the UK anyway, once the ESIA is completed and you're ready to start the actual movement of ships and equipment, you'll have the decommissioning plan and the environmental appraisal. And these are the 2 documents that then guide that final process. This is an example from the Shell website, which I recommend that you visit, because on the left, all these documents here with the bullet list, and these over here at the bottom, these are all technical or supporting documents which are openly downloadable, and they're all, even here you have they're all PDF documents, and this is the file size. So as you can see in the top side, the comparative assessment process, the technical supporting documents for the top side, the jackets, the base structure, cell contents, drill cuttings, pipelines, stakeholder report, and then lower down, you have the actual decommissioning programs for the top side, for pipelines, for jackets, for the field, and the environmental statement and various appendices. So the contents table on the right, many of you may not be able to read it if you're looking on a phone, but that's a decommissioning plan or program for the top side. So that's the structure that is in the air. And this is the kind of table of contents which you need to think about for your next task. It'll describe the description of the elements, the implication for decommissioning of other infrastructure, the methods for removal. That's a critical part, how you are actually going to do it, a summary of the impact assessment. This is just 9 or 10 pages, and the interested parties who have consulted and how the project is going to be managed, including the schedule and the cost and the closeout report and the post-decommissioning monitoring and evaluation. So this is a complete decommissioning program. It's an example from Shell. It's fairly recent, and it's one that you can all access and study to get a real understanding of best practice. Returning to the 9 best principles. So when we get to disposal, and the platform and materials can be either refurbished or reused or scrapped and recycled or disposed in specified landfills. We've talked about that. Site clearance. Now, the site clearance is very important on land and at sea, and there should be a pre-decommissioning survey of everything that's there, and a post-decommissioning survey. And in some countries, there's a special checklist, and there'll be a qualified expert to visit the site afterwards to confirm. They may need to take some soil samples to confirm that there's no debris left behind, and there's no infrastructure, and there's no materials. And if there are any specific issues, that they all should be documented. And then in the marine environment, you may have to send a remote operated vehicle, an ROV, or divers, depending on the depth, to go down and do a final inspection on the seabed. And in some places, you may have to do some test trawling. So that's a fishing boat with a net to go backwards and forwards over the area where there was the infrastructure to ensure that there's nothing left behind. And after decommissioning, then you have this final process of remediation. So on land, these contaminated sites, if that's the case, they're called brownfield sites. They need to be cleaned up so that the land can be safely used afterwards. We've talked about that. Any hazardous materials or pollutants need to be removed. Any contamination that has entered into the water table, that also has to be cleaned, and any toxic fumes to be controlled. And typically wells and pipelines and storage facilities and processing plants on land have that potential to contaminate the ground. And then the final step is the site is the marking of what's left, and if there are necessary any safety zones. It could be that safety zones will have to be there for a number of years whilst the environment is self-cleansing, and then there should be a closeout or a closure report. So the final steps in the decommissioning planning is the financial assurance, which we talked about, to make sure that advance funds are available, that we've got to learn from the whole exercise. And once again, as we get to the end, the monitoring and enforcement. Marking of the remains. In the UK, for example, the operators must ensure a minimum of 6 weeks in advance notification of any change to decommissioning installations or pipelines. For the marine environment, that has to be reported to the UK Hydrographic Office. So in countries with marine sectors, those marine agencies have to be notified. And there may be agreed that some concrete installations or footings might be left, and those they become an obstruction on the seabed. They may be harmless, but they also need to be informed the positions and the sizes to the hydrographic office. And as a stakeholder, the hydrographic office and the navigation warnings need to be made, especially if there's large structures or platforms are being removed by slow tugs, floating production operations, and other surface structures. And if there's any drill cuttings, which are the rock from the drilling that's been accumulated on the sea, it makes small hills, that also has to be marked on the Admiralty charts and informed, so that those areas can be avoided by any kind of fishing activity as a foul area or a shoal depth. So this, in the marine environment, there are certain procedures that have to be followed. Navigation aids, additionally, should be installed if there are any remains of concrete installations above the sea. The fishermen have to be informed. Operators' responsibility, the operator is responsible for maintaining any equipment that they have to be left in the sea. They have to advise mariners, sea-going people, and fishing activities and shipping that they should be included in the decommissioning program, and that the hydrographic office should be kept informed of any changes or any removals or any navigation aids or installations for inclusion on the charts and the navigation tools which are used by all maritime users. Again, finishing off with the maritime issues, there needs to be a 500-meter exclusion zone around any structures, and this exclusion zone will only stop existing when there are no more structures above the surface, and safety zones around subsea installations have to remain in place, and they have to be reported in the closeout report. And work at the moment is ongoing in the UK, at least, to assess any requirements for post-decommissioning safety zones. So once an area has been cleaned, there are still some processes on how long will it take before that area can be, let's say, fully open access. So these are really to do with safety procedures in the marine environment for other users of the sea to ensure or to minimize any risks that they may incur from any materials which have been left behind. A closeout report from Shell 2018, so it's 3 years old. So this is a Brent Delta topside. So in this, you can study these documents, and you can see how the process took place, how the preparations were there, how the removal happened, and then how the safety and environmental performance was ensured. So these are the typical kind of documents which are being produced by the regulators. This is in Scotland, where one of the questions I asked Enzo was about ports. Well, in Scotland, in late 2018, also quite recently, there's a decommissioning port which is being proposed. And the decommissioning port to be constructed also requires an EIA, because you can imagine there's going to be so many thousand tons of waste material that's going to be brought to an area of coastline, which is designing a port specifically to handle it. So not only do you need the EIA for the actual decommissioning of the rig offshore, but you also need an EIA for the facility on the land, which is going to be designed to handle the decommissioning. What is good about this is that in the case of Scotland anyway, as the numbers of rigs offshore are decreasing, there's been a lot of loss of jobs, of boats that supply the industry and the infrastructure, helicopter services and all this. So locally that can have an impact on the economy. But at the same time now, the counterbalance is with the increase in decommissioning in some parts of the world, that is going to generate new jobs in those areas that were previously involved in the sector. Now, eventually it will end, because once everything is decommissioned, then there will be no more jobs for exploration and production or for decommissioning. But at least in the meantime, that skill transfer is quite good for the local economy. And just to give you an example of how this is advancing, the University of Aberdeen in the north of Scotland now has a master's degree in decommissioning. So if there are any of you who are thinking about a career in this field, as Paul will tell you, this field started 10 or 20 years ago, and it's going to run and run and run for several more decades. And the more qualified experts who are trained on not just what we are covering in these 3 days, but trained on real multitude of case studies and best practice, as best practice itself will evolve, then that's good for the future and good for those involved in this sector. So the key messages are, here we go. Decommissioning needs to be considered well before infrastructure needs to be commissioned. We've been saying this before, and it's a real take-home message. You've got to begin early. Best practice, it requires a standalone ESIA, and it varies between countries, but often a decommissioning plan is supported by an ESIA. And after decommissioning, site remediation is usually the next step to ensure sites are not hazardous to people nearby or the natural environment, including the water table. And finally, that the marking of the remains and the safety zone can be a complex procedure, especially in the deep sea.
Thank you
very much.
Round of applause for Matt. Right on time. Matt, we have a couple of questions for you already.
Sure.
I didn't have to ask. So Husam asks, what is the criteria to verify that the decommissioned installations are treated properly in specifically to empty chemical barrels? I think this is a problem, like legacy waste of this sort is a problem in Iraq. So he's asking to know, how do you verify that the treatment was done, was carried out?
Right. Well, that's a question for Harvey, I think, in Australia, who's going to join us tomorrow.
Right.
But I can have a go. There in this.
Anne-Brett as well. Chip in.
Okay. Well, I'll make one quick comment. There are a lot of procedures for decontaminating all kinds of equipment, and tanks and pipes and these closed units. How to clean them? What is the inspection? I'm not familiar with them, but I'm sure there are standard practice for ensuring that you don't get a buildup of gases, which can be explosive and highly dangerous, and make sure that there are no residues left. It's like contaminated land. There are procedures for taking samples. There are small gadgets which you can use to capture hydrocarbons in the air. So there are out there a number of protocols for this. Anybody else to add to that?
Anne-Brett, do you want to say something regarding how they verify that the installations are being treated properly? Like how does this work in Norway?
They are like waste facilities, so we regard them as waste facilities when they receive scrap metals, whatever, from installation being decommissioned. So they need to have a special, in our case, a permit. So and they will be with strict regulations to it, strict provisions. So it has to be in a very regulated system, because otherwise it can happen that they do, as indicated here, treat the barrels not so good and so on. So and we require reports from them and also go on inspections and so on. But in the first place, they need to have to be strict regulated.
Thank you. I think you also covered this, and I think Sven will cover this in his presentation tomorrow. how regulators actually do regulate and verify all this the criteria that they use. We have another question. Sorry, Ahmed, I see your hand up, but I got this question before you, so I'll just ask the question quickly. So what are the legal guarantees to urge companies to decommission, especially with the high cost, to prevent them from like leaving the situation without being decommissioned? So basically, I think they're asking like what regulators can do to ensure that companies do decommission properly. I think
the legislation, some examples I shared yesterday included different countries where there is legislation that requires proof that you have deposited certain amount in an account, that you have the mechanism, you have the means to decommission. So that's one way. And then the legislation would have some penalties if you couldn't do that. And they might revoke your license. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. I mean, as Ping recommended yesterday, that we always try, well, what should always be tried is a harmonious relationship between the regulator and the operators.
Yep.
They're both looking for a win-win situation. So you want to try and avoid a situation where you have the government suing a company because they didn't prepare the accounts for the funds. In some countries, the government takes that cost. Yeah. So it's something that has to be documented in the production sharing agreement at the beginning.
Right.
So there shouldn't be these surprises later on if it's all upfront planned. Ping, you can add to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I want to share my experience with New Zealand and in Brunei is that, say, for example, Shell is a big operator in Brunei and they have a large number of installations. So what the regulator could use is your environment law and your safety law, and how do you what do you do in that law to penalize when the various operators, not just in the oil industry, in the various industry, break the law if they're not complying with these? Because ultimately, we talk about the obligation to decommission timely and not to have incident where there is a blowout or where the wells or the pipeline, lost containment. It's all related to environment and safety risk. So I've seen situations where regulators will put what they call a stop work order. So you're not basically allowing the operation to continue until the problem is resolved. So there are many, it's up to individual country how you police it, how you you might issue a fine, you might issue a stop work order. So it's like a warning. There might be and if the operator are really breaking all the rules, then maybe you want to consider that they are not responsible operator to continue operating in the country. Would that then means that they're breaking the agreement that you had in the first place? So indeed, I think maybe a cases where you need to involve lawyers, but I hope that it won't get to that stage. So what's important is indeed to make sure that there's sufficient fund. So you might want to also make sure that when you have a new operator coming into your country, they are reputable operators, or they are operators that can deal with the high decommissioning costs, that understand what they're really doing. So in some countries, that's actually being monitored. For example, if say the big companies like Shell, BP, Chevron, and they sell it to a smaller company, you might want to understand that and make sure that the smaller company can do the decommissioning later on. Because the cases that we've seen globally, in Australia, for example, is that, and maybe even in the United States, is that the asset get transferred from bigger operators to the smaller operators, to even smaller operators, who then go bankrupt. And then that's where you get the orphaned asset. And that's where you get all the environmental problems and the safety problems that we see in the news today.
Yeah, I think, and for Iraq's case, most of the oil fields are onshore, so they often have issues with all this and legacy waste as well, which is like always like has been a huge problem in the country. So it's important, like I'll try to reiterate what you had said in the beginning. It's important that they start early to consider like the decommissioning plans, check if they have the financial capacity to actually decommission, if they have also the technical know-how to actually do these things before you can maybe use permits, like in Norway, use permits to either give them a permit to actually go ahead or not, or you can stop it. So yes, so thank you, Matt and Pink, for this. Ahmed, you can go ahead and ask your question. I think this will probably be the last before we go to the group one. Yes.
It's not a question per se, but an intervention. I worked with several government and non-government organizations in the environment impact assessment for the projects that will be done to protect the environments, whether marine or land or air. But in the problem in the implementation, the environment impact assessment could fail and would stop it because this is for the environment. So is there a way to form a plan for environment impact assessment to stop for decommissioning? So this is my question. So should there be a plan for environment impact assessment for decommissioning?
Pink, do you want to go? Did you get the question?
I didn't quite get the end of it. I'm sorry.
So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Ahmed. I think he was asking, should there be a plan to like use like EIAs or ESIAs to stop all these impacts from happening? Like because some companies actually do ESIAs or EIAs and don't actually, like they still have problems eventually. So what could they do?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a challenge. Of course, if the regulator doesn't have any teeth, then it's going to be difficult to implement the recommendations from the EIA. Assuming the EIA is a good EIA and the recommendations are sensible, then it should be followed. Now, of course, in some countries it's difficult. If the operator is the government, then they have some kind of conflict of interest there, where the government is the regulator, the government is the producer. So who's advising who? But best practice is that an EIA is done for the decommissioning of the assets that are no longer in use. So that should be done, and they should be decommissioned. We shouldn't leave contaminated infrastructure out there in the desert or wherever just because they don't want to spend some money to clean it up. So if they're going to follow best practice, they need to decommission it to the highest level. And if they need expertise, there's plenty of expertise around the world that can do it.
There is a saying that decommissioning is an obligation. It's not an option not to decommission. We don't even need to discuss that with the operators. And that's the language that we use in the industry. It is an obligation. It's a must do. And, you would not release the responsibility until it is done.
Right. Okay. Mr. Ahmed, I hope this answered your question. Did it answer your question? You're muted. I don't hear you.
I think that a part of the answer was, sorry, he's breaking up. I think his internet is down.
I think it's compulsory in our industry, whether you are in operations, building a new project, or taking out a platform or taking out a wells.
Right.
When you do activities that has a potential positive or negative impact on the environment, there should be a legal requirement to do an environmental impact assessment.
Yes.
So everyone understand what are the risks and how should it be managed.
Yeah, and this is why it's also good to have like coordination across ministries, like relevant stakeholders, so that in case you miss out an impact, another ministry can like highlight and say, oh, the fishes will be impacted, so we need to put this into consideration.
Yeah, and Paul came on screen timely. You can give more business to people like Paul, to do this experiment, and Matthew as well, of course.
Well, I think one thing that I wanted to add to that is that the impact assessment should not just identify the impacts, but it should go so far as to identify the mitigation measures to bring the impacts down to the lowest level possible. And that's where sometimes we see differences, is that some impact assessments simply identify that there's going to be an impact. It's going to be high, significant or non-significant, or big or small, but it doesn't go so far as to say, here's the impact, and then here's the post mitigation impact level. And that's really what is important, is to try to identify how do you get the impact down to the lowest level possible.
Right. Thank you. And Gret, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Sometimes this question, what is the legal status of the environmental impact assessment and the plans that the operator has shown in the EIA. So we have a second step, we have a next step in Norway, giving permit with provisions, so they are they can be enforced legally if there is non-compliance. But I know that the situation, this practice varies from country to country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I just add, I think the problem with Iraq is, as he said, is that most of the companies are government. So it's like the Southern Iraq Oil Company or the Basra Oil Company or whatever. So it's not private sector. They're not members of international oil and gas operations, best practice associations. They're the state. And I think a similar thing happens in parts of Colombia, if I'm not mistaken. So that is a particular challenge where it's the state that is the operator.
Yeah. So we have a thank you everyone for this for chipping in. We have a last question. Are there any best practices associated with compensation measures, both in bioethic and social impacts, that cannot be mitigated? So any best practices you can point us towards for the regulator to have?
Well, there are again, if I can start, there is a what's called the mitigation hierarchy, where you try and avoid, you minimize, and then if you can't, and you mitigate, and if you can't, and there is still an impact, that has to be identified and it has to be quantified. And if it means fishermen cannot fish in a certain area of river or lake or coastline forever or for a certain period of time, then I was on a study in Tanzania for an LNG plant. We had to document how much were the fishermen earning in that particular area. And there has to be a detailed study to document what was their baseline income. And if there's going to be a compensation, then the compensation has to be commensurate with the income. So there are many guidelines on best practice to identify the actual compensation.
Okay, thank you very much. Round of applause to everyone. Thank you, Matt, for the presentation and for this discussion. So we're closing now, but the last thing on our list is the group work exercise. I have shared via the chat presentations from today, as well as the group work again, because I just in case people from yesterday weren't able to download the group work. I also shared the group work via email. So we'll be doing the group work, and my colleague Devashri has ably created breakout rooms. So I'll call on Ping. Ping, are you ready to explain the group work? So Ping will be explaining the group work on what we're going to do. So we'll be doing this exercise based on our country teams. So like I had shared earlier, Colombia will be in breakout room 1, Ghana will be in breakout room 2, Iraq will be in breakout room 3, and Mozambique in breakout room 4. But Ping is going to explain what the exercise is all about.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask Matt to support as well.
Yeah.
Matt, let me just share my screen. Which one is it? This one. Okay, I hope that works. All right, so this is the decommissioning plan exercise. I'm not sure, Chi, has this been shared with all the participants?
Yes, via email and in the chat as well.
Okay, great. So the objective here is, I'm not sure if I should read through it, but okay, I think I will briefly run through what is described here. The aim is that, yeah, the aim here is it's all about the decommissioning plan. So as it has been explained throughout the 2 days that we've had so far, is that this is a plan or a document that is very important, because in many countries, like in the UK, in Brunei, and I'm not sure, maybe in the States, so in many countries, there is a summary document of all the information that the regulator, yourself as regulator, need to know in order to agree or disagree or challenge, what should be the decisions made in decommissioning. So the exercise is actually to ask all of you in your groups to think about what is the content that should go into the decommissioning plan. So as you can read here, a decommissioning plan is usually submitted by the operator or the owner to the regulator for approval. So based on what are the assets that are in your country, so what are the type of infrastructure that you have in your country, you think about one particular asset. It can be an offshore platform, it can be an onshore plant like what you see here. Think about that, and with also its attached pipelines and flow lines and so on, to develop a decommissioning plan for this. Sorry, the table of content of the decommissioning plan for this. So this is, here you can see there are a few questions that we ask. One is to firstly select, as I already said, the asset or the infrastructure that is to be decommissioned. It can be onshore or offshore, depending on what you have. If you're in Iraq, for example, it probably will be an onshore plant. If you're in, I don't know, Ghana, maybe you have offshore asset platforms. And from here, once you have selected that, develop a decommissioning plan checklist or a table of contents. So the idea is to complete this table. Okay, and then discuss and explain why it is important to include each heading that you included. And also explain who are the stakeholders that need to review the document. And finally, when should the decommissioning plan be submitted? Okay, so I think Matt in his last presentation did show already some examples of decommissioning plan that are actually available in the public domain, and many of it are UK. But if you search a little bit, you could also find other examples. But I could also perhaps flash some other examples. Let me see if I can do that. So this is another example of, okay, wait. Matt, do you have anything to add while I'm, hold on, let me search where things are.
I think you've explained the process.
Yeah, so maybe while Ping is looking for
So maybe while I'm searching for another example, if you have any question on how to do this on the objective or what you need to do, please let us know.
I hope this this is clear for everyone. So we've created a Google Doc again, a Google Doc link.
I can't hear you, Chidima.
Oh, really? Can you hear me?
It's the interpretation channel that's.
Oh no, you have to put it off for you to hear me. Can someone confirm that they hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. So like I was saying, we have created
Can you hear Chidima?
a Google Doc link with the table of what you need, and we have shared the exercise with you via email and through the chat, so for you to complete this exercise. So but because of time, you would only work in groups, and we will do the presentations tomorrow. So each group, each country team will join a breakout room, and we'll also have Ping and Matt and some other of our colleagues join to help you in case you have any questions. But unfortunately, there will be no interpretation in the breakout rooms. So hence, if you have any questions regarding how to go about the group work, you can like ask the question now or write in the chat if you don't understand anything, but I think it's clear. So Ping will also show like a sample of what we expect that you should put. So if you've been listening throughout since yesterday and today, all the presenters have been highlighting different like topics or different issues that should be included in a decommissioning plan. So this is what we want you, but you have to focus specifically on your country. So if you're onshore, if your country is only onshore, you focus on onshore. But if you're offshore, you can make the topics in your decommissioning plan to be focused on offshore. So yes, so Ping is showing a sample of the kind of topics that are included in a decommissioning plan. So this exercise generally is just for you as regulators to be able to know what to look for in a decommissioning plan when an operator like submits it. So you'll be able to say, oh, we didn't see this, or we need to see this in this decommissioning plan, or things like that. So we've been discussing this all through the training. So
So as you think about what should be in the content of the decommissioning plan, you would want to understand, you would want to ask yourself, what do you need before you agree or disagree with the proposal? What do you need? What information do you need? I think the most basic one, and I can already tell you, is a description of what is the asset, or a description of how the operator wants to decommission, and what do they do with the waste, for example. So these are just some of the examples, but what else are there? Or even how they engage the stakeholder. I'm giving you the answer, but maybe from there you can think about why is this important. Okay.
So thanks, Pink, for that expo. So yes, like she said, this is what you need to include in the table. So my colleague Kariman will put on the chat the link where you can also put where you can work together. But if you're in the same room, please feel free to work on like a Word document, and then we'll do the presentation. So it's basically like 5 o'clock now. So we'll leave the platform open, like the breakout room will be open and run up till like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Like we'll close the platform, I think like 10 minutes to 6. Like I think we'll leave it open for 50 to 60 minutes. So you can work together just in case you're not in the same room or the same space. So you'll be able to discuss in the breakout rooms these issues. Please flag if you did not get the exercise but I had shared this yesterday via email, and I have shared it again in the chat, so you can actually download it. So yes, I see the link. So you'll be able to put in each you'll be able to put in each table what we require. Like like we said, you need to identify first, like put your country and identify an asset. So tell us where it's located. Is it onshore or is it offshore? Then the next table you have to discuss what information do we require? What information do we need to see before we approve operations to go on in this location? So you put that like the sample we've seen, and then you also discuss why it's important. So if you choose like, oh, description of the asset, tell us why it's important for you. Just one single line. You don't really need to write like a whole sentence because you would present. Then also, who are the stakeholders that will be reviewing this information? So I think we all have the exercise. Then at the end of the exercise or at the beginning, depending on you select one person in your team that will report back to us tomorrow. So we'll be doing the reporting back tomorrow. So you present per your group what you have discussed and your outcomes. So if you have any questions regarding this, please raise your hand or write in the chat box. My colleague Devashri would now go ahead to put you in different breakout rooms. And this platform will be on for an hour. So it will probably close in an hour. So please feel free to discuss within the breakout rooms. And then Matt and Ping will also be on hand to help out. If you have any questions, please flag.
And you have to show me how do I access the breakout rooms.
Yeah, so Devashri is putting everyone in breakout rooms now.
I think Anne and Paul are also available to join.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, Angret and Paul are also available to join. Everyone, like all the team members are available to join to help out in case you have any questions. So we'll be doing the reporting back tomorrow, just because we're out of time.
Just to confirm, we're not going to have the simultaneous translation in the breakout rooms.
Yes, so we wouldn't have any interpretation in the breakout rooms. So if you're unable to speak English or you need clarification, you can just type in the breakout rooms, and then maybe one of our team members will be able to read or use Google Translate to translate the question and write back to you in the answer. It might not be exactly correct, but at least that's the best you can do at this point.
She can Matt and I move between all the different breakout rooms. Yeah.
So okay. I've made you and Gret, Matt, and Paul. I don't know if Ezio would want to join as well. I've made you guys co-hosts, so you'll be able to move in and out of breakout rooms.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Dev, please let us know when the breakout rooms have been created.
Yes, I'm working on it. Maybe another 30 seconds.
Okay, no problem. So I think you see a pop-up on your screen when the breakout rooms are done. So just make sure you join your country breakout room. So again, just to flag, Colombia has breakout room 1, Ghana has breakout room 2, Iraq has breakout room 3, and Mozambique has breakout room 4. So it's just alphabetical order. So you see a pop-up in your screen that says join the breakout rooms, and then you'll be able to find your colleagues in. So we'll leave the breakout rooms on for an hour, like less than an hour from now. So say 55 minutes, and then the platform will be closed. So our reporting back will be tomorrow. So we'll get your outputs, what you have discussed in your group. So please also pick out a rapporteur that will relay the message to us tomorrow. Thank you.
So I will launch all the rooms now.
Yes.
Can we keep one screen open, perhaps sharing the document that Ping had just now?
Yeah,
Is that a possibility?
Yes, I think it's possible. Or Ping can also share it via the chat.
Sorry, what is it that you want me to share, Chi?
The example that you put on the screen.
Okay. So yeah, this is a UK example. Okay, I will share in the chat. I actually lost it. Hold on.
Thank you, Dev. I see that Dev has created the breakout rooms. I think everyone should have this as a pop-up on their screen. So feel free to join.
Yes, breakout room. So down at the bottom of the screen, there's 4 little squares.
So we're here technically to help anyone with any questions. So after this, I think we'll just close, like we don't have to come. Yeah, for the interpreters, I think we're closing right now. We'll probably not need you today anymore. Thank you so much.